This is William Tatlata. It's August 7th, 2016. This is a presentation of my literature review for Moral Courage, Vital to Success in Organizational Leadership. This presentation will describe the moral virtue of courage in organizational leaders. The organizational leadership literature offers many definitions of courage, but according to Corner 2014, the consensus is becoming evident in the literature that an act of courage includes three components. 1, a morally worthy goal. 2, intentional action. And 3, perceived risks, threats, or obstacles. Page 66. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to make decisions and act in spite of the fear that is warning against making that decision. The research will describe courage in leadership, how it is defined, how it is measured, and if people are born with it, or if it's developed. In addition, potential methods by which leaders can work to develop the virtue of courage are explored and hope to answer the question, can leaders develop the ability to act courageously? Throughout history, heroes have been made by acting courageously in life or death situations. Consider Rosa Parks, the African-American female who refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a segregated bus. Or Greek philosopher Socrates, who chose to be put to death rather than apologize for refusing to recognize the gods recognized by the state. The willingness of these people to face the consequences of their actions in support of their moral beliefs demonstrates their willingness to stand for their beliefs in spite of the risk of individual harm, also known as courage. There can be varying degrees of courage, ranging from heroic acts of life and death to simply confronting a coworker about a disagreement of individual values. In either of these situations, one has to decide whether to submit to his or her fears in order to avoid the unpleasant consequences, or decide to act courageously in support of his or her values despite the presence of fear. In the modern business world, we're rarely required to call upon our primitive instincts for actual survival, but our physiological responses have adapted to the stress of organizational life. Making decisions, confronting bosses, co-workers, and subordinates that challenge our core principles are just a few of the situations that cause fear of consequences and require acts of modern courage. Despite the numerous definitions provided in the literature, defining courage is very subjective and can be difficult to agree upon when looked at from different cultures, societies, and even within different organizations. It seems impossible to define an act that is so heavily dependent on the morals of the respective culture and the individual across different cultures and regions. What's morally courageous in one society might be considered appalling to another. Consider a suicide bomber that has been taught his or her entire life that dying for his or her religion is the ultimate act of courage and heroism. Or even a soldier fighting and killing members of the opposing country who are also killing for their country. In this case, who is right and who is wrong? That's possibly dependent on their cultural beliefs, which are ingrained in a person from their upbringing. Perhaps they're both courageous for fighting for their beliefs, depending on the definition of courage that you accept. But in order for us to consider what is morally courageous within organizations, it's important that we land on an acceptable definition. This definition is provided by Sikirka and Bagozzi in 2007 as the ability to use inner principles to do what is good for others, regardless of threat to self as a matter of practice. Hernandez, 2008, specifies the 5 conditions must be present for moral courage to exist. 1, the situation prompts a consideration of one's individual values. 2, free choice is involved in taking action in response to the situation. 3, personal and or professional risk is associated with taking action. 4, the risk to self and other stakeholders has been adequately appraised. And 5, the action is in line with the individual's moral standards. In courage literature, there have been numerous attempts to define and study courage by developing a system of measurement for the concept. Here we present 3. One is the Organizational Courage Assessment, or the OCA, presented by Kilman et al., 2009, which collects data from a questionnaire based on observations of acts of courage despite the level of fear that is present in the organization. It also characterizes organizations in a continuum of high and low acts of courage and a high and low culture of fear within the organization. Following that, organizations are classified as either courageous, fearful, bureaucratic, and quantum, with quantum being the goal, where fear is low. So courage is either assumed or it's unnecessary because the organization is well aligned with the stakeholders. The second measurement for courage is the Values and Action Survey, the Quality of Life Questionnaire presented by Curtis and Kelly, 2013. These surveys utilize pre- and post self-reporting, interviews, and coaches' field notes to measure psychological courage during an 8-week-long life coaching program. Third, we present Harbour and Kisfalvi, 2011, who utilize both self-perception and observation of reactions to a real-life situation. Subjects were asked if the acts were perceived as courageous, not courageous, or if the situation did not warrant courage at all. Next, I attempt to answer the question, are some people more courageous, or do they simply lack fear? Rackman, 2004, presents an extensive study of fear and courage, focusing mainly on soldiers, astronauts, and civilians from war-torn countries. He relates the story of astronauts who, despite their high risk of death, performed all of their tasks perfectly and scored very high on psychomotor, intellectual, and emotional tests. Page 157. This success in the face of danger is attributed to extensive training on specific environmental conditions and tasks. But Rackman also, in 2004, describes a test regarding cardiac acceleration while completing a stressful laboratory task in which 3 groups were studied. One group was decorated bomb disposal operators, the second was non-decorated bomb disposal operators, and the third group was civilians with no military training. The civilians exhibited the highest heart rate during the experiment, while the decorated bomb disposal operators had the lowest. This may be attributed to the fact that soldiers had specific training related to the task, but what is surprising is the difference between the 2 groups of bomb disposal operators. Both groups had undergone the exact same military training, yet the decorated group had a significantly, consistently lower heart rate throughout the experiment. This data may lead to a reasonable conclusion that some people may just be, in fact, born with less fear. If this is indeed the case, those with less fear may have an easier time completing tasks under pressure. This does not necessarily indicate that those with less fear have more courage, and in fact, it may point to just the opposite. They may appear visibly to be more courageous, but it's possible that they're just not experiencing the same physical effects from the stress of the consequences. Rackman doesn't elaborate on the possible genetic link contributing to the absence of fear in some individuals. More research is necessary to draw a conclusion on that genetic link. Harbour and Kisfalvi propose that courageous leaders possess a higher degree of self-confidence than non-courageous leaders. This self-confidence gives one a belief that they're making the right decision and have less fear of failure. In addition, one's confidence may possibly increase after having made a courageous decision, therefore contributing to a higher level of confidence and more courage. Segurka and Bagozzi, 2007, narrow courage down to a very simple question: to act or not to act, page 133. The authors present a framework consisting of 5 steps that a person works through, both consciously and unconsciously, when deciding whether to act on an ethical challenge. Each of these steps has a factor on whether the person will act courageously or not. The steps start with the effective reaction and the cognitive information processing, such as evaluating the emotions, the group norms, and the outcome expectancies. The second step is the desire to act. Step 3 is self-regulation of desire to act, such as one's values, traits, virtues, and etc. Step 4 is deciding to act, and step 5 is taking action. By breaking down each step in the decision-making process, one can concentrate on improving the self-reflection, self-evaluation, and self-regulation. Page 145. And so we come to the question, can courage be developed? Invicq 2014 presents 3 psychological states that can be developed to increase courage in the entrepreneur. The first is taking informed risks, or acquiring the knowledge and the background to make informed decisions. This includes the devil's advocate phenomenon, where one person in a group will take the opposing view to ensure that a knowledgeable, informed risk is being taken. Second is integrity, or identifying one's values and organizational values. And third is resilience, where a resilient leader will accept failure as the process of learning. Curtis and Kelly, 2013, showed evidence that through the use of a life coach, psychological courage and self-determination can be improved. One of the major contributors to their success was simply raising the level of self-awareness so that the coachee had an idea of what they needed to work on in order to improve. By first becoming aware of one's abilities, strengths, and weaknesses, he or she can improve the areas that are contributing to the ability to act courageously. And third, from Corner and Macon, is utilize the power of relationships. There's much research provided on the unlock and dissolve phenomenon by sharing deep memories and rebuild those cognitive processes through positive relationships. And Corner studies the individualization phenomenon or self-identity in the midst of social and organizational dynamics. In concluding comments, I believe that courage is a subjective topic. An agreement on a clear definition is dependent on accepted cultural beliefs, and therefore a global definition of courage and moral courage specifically is very difficult to arrive at. The topic that related to moral courage in organizations that has potential to elicit positive development on the subject is a military training seems to illustrate that courage can be developed as demonstrated in the multitude of courageous acts during war. The question is, and according to our definition and requirements for a courageous act presented by Hernandez in 2008, is does military training eliminate the ability to choose freely, thus eliminating these situations from Hernandez's definition of courage? And there are possible areas for further exploration on the development of courage. Number 1 is conflict avoidance versus the courage to act. Number 2, the connection between self-confidence, self-esteem, and the ability to act courageously. 3, past interpersonal relationships and experiences and how they lead to one's development of emotions and abilities. And 4, further research into the unlock and dissolve theory presented by Macon and Siegel.